Marcus Washington pulled his weathered pickup truck into the driveway of his modest two-story home on Maple Street. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the well-maintained lawn that his wife Sarah had worked so hard to perfect. Their twin daughters, 8-year-old Maya and Mia, came running out the front door with backpacks bouncing on their shoulders, fresh from another day at Lincoln Elementary. "Daddy's home," Maya squealed, throwing her arms around his thick waist as he stepped out of the truck. Marcus smiled, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners as he scooped both girls up in his massive arms. At 6 feet 4 inches and weighing 260 pounds, Marcus was an imposing figure. But his daughters saw only their gentle giant of a father who told the best bedtime stories and made the fluffiest pancakes on Sunday mornings. "How was school today, my little scholars?" he asked, carrying them toward the house where Sarah stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Her beautiful smile lit up her face as she watched her husband with their children. After 12 years of marriage, she still felt her heart skip when he came home each evening. "Mrs. Peterson taught us about butterflies today," Mia chattered excitedly. "Did you know they taste with their feet?" "And Tommy Martinez lost another tooth," Maya added. "The tooth fairy is going to be busy tonight." Marcus set the girls down gently and wrapped his arms around Sarah, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender shampoo. "How was your day, beautiful?" he murmured against her ear. "Better now that you're home," she replied, standing on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek. "Dinner's almost ready. The girls have been asking about that camping trip you promised them." "This weekend," Marcus confirmed, ruffling Maya's curly hair. "But first, homework and chores." "Deal?" "Deal," both girls chorused before racing inside to dump their backpacks in the living room. The Washington family had moved to Pinewood Estates 3 years ago, drawn by the excellent schools and family-friendly atmosphere. The neighborhood was a mix of young professionals and growing families, with tree-lined streets and well-kept homes that spoke of middle-class stability. Marcus worked as a security consultant for a local firm, a job that allowed him to use his military background while keeping regular hours to spend time with his family. What the neighbors didn't know was that Marcus Washington was Colonel Marcus Washington, a 20-year veteran of the United States Army and former Delta Force commander. His chest bore decorations most people only saw in movies, including 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and a Purple Heart from his tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. He had led some of the most dangerous missions in modern military history, but he preferred to keep that part of his life private. Here in Pinewood Estates, he was just Marcus, Sarah's husband and the girl's father. As they sat down for dinner that evening, Sarah mentioned the upcoming Homeowners Association meeting. "They're discussing new regulations about lawn maintenance and exterior home improvements," she said, passing a bowl of mashed potatoes to Maya. "Mrs. Chen from down the street said they're getting pretty strict about compliance." Marcus nodded absently, more focused on helping Mia cut her chicken than worrying about HOA politics. He had dealt with far more serious regulatory bodies than a suburban homeowners association. Besides, their property was always well maintained. Sarah took pride in their home's appearance, and Marcus made sure any repairs were done promptly and professionally. "Speaking of neighbors," Sarah continued, lowering her voice slightly, "I saw those 2 men in polo shirts walking around the neighborhood again today. They had clipboards and were taking pictures of different houses. Probably just HOA board members doing inspections," Marcus replied, though something in his wife's tone made him pay closer attention. "Did they say anything to you?" "No. But they stopped in front of the Garcia's house for a long time, writing things down. Mrs. Garcia was pulling weeds in her garden, and they just stood there watching her like she was doing something wrong." Marcus filed this information away mentally. In his military experience, unusual surveillance activity, even in seemingly innocent contexts, was worth noting. But this was suburban Ohio, not Kabul. The biggest threats here were usually aggressive door-to-door salespeople and the occasional package thief. After dinner, Marcus helped the girls with their homework while Sarah cleaned the kitchen. Maya struggled with her math worksheet, and Marcus patiently explained fractions using pizza slices as examples. Mia practiced reading aloud from a book about dolphins, her finger tracing each word as she sounded them out. "Daddy," Maya said, looking up from her worksheet, "why do some people look at us funny sometimes?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten slightly, but he kept his voice calm and gentle. "What do you mean, sweetheart? Like at the grocery store last week? That lady kept staring at us and whispering to her friend, And sometimes when we're walking Buster in the park, people move to the other side of the path. Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Sarah, who had paused in her dishwashing to listen. They had hoped to shield the girls from the reality of prejudice for as long as possible, but they were getting old enough to notice things. Sometimes people are curious about families that look different from theirs, Marcus explained carefully. It doesn't mean they're bad people, just that they might not be used to seeing families like ours in their neighborhood. But we're just regular people, Mia said, looking confused. Yes, baby, we are, Sarah said, drying her hands and joining them at the kitchen table. And anyone who takes the time to get to know us figures that out pretty quickly. Marcus pulled both girls onto his lap, wrapping his strong arms around them protectively. You know what makes our family special? He asked. It's not what we look like on the outside. It's how much we love each other and how we take care of one another. That's what really matters. The girls seemed satisfied with this explanation and returned to their homework with renewed focus. But Marcus found himself thinking about Sarah's observation regarding the men with clipboards. In his line of work, both past and present, he had learned to trust his instincts about potential threats. Something about the situation didn't feel quite right, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what was bothering him. Later that evening, after the girls were tucked into bed with stories about brave princesses and magical adventures, Marcus stood at the living room window looking out at the quiet street. The neighborhood was peaceful, with warm light glowing from windows and the occasional dog walker passing under the streetlights. Everything appeared normal, but Marcus had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. What are you thinking about? Sarah asked, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. Just enjoying the quiet, he replied, covering her hands with his. It's nice to be home, but even as he said the words, Marcus found himself automatically cataloging potential security vulnerabilities in their home's position, noting sight lines and escape routes with the practiced eye of a soldier. Old habits died hard, and something told him those habits might prove useful sooner than he hoped. The next morning started like any other Saturday. Marcus was in the kitchen making his famous blueberry pancakes while Sarah packed snacks for the girls' soccer practice. Maya and Mia sat at the breakfast table still in their pajamas, arguing over who got to use the maple syrup first. Girls, there's plenty of syrup for everyone, Sarah laughed, braiding Maya's hair into neat pigtails. And if you don't hurry up and eat, you'll be late for practice. Marcus was flipping the last batch of pancakes when the doorbell rang. He glanced at the clock on the microwave. 8:30 in the morning was early for visitors, especially on a weekend. Through the kitchen window, he could see a white sedan parked at the curb that he didn't recognize. I'll get it, he called out, wiping his hands on a dish towel as he walked to the front door. Through the peephole, he saw two men in matching navy blue polo shirts with some kind of official-looking patch on the chest. Both were white, middle-aged, and carrying clipboards. One was tall and thin with a scraggly beard, while the other was shorter and stockier with a prominent belly hanging over his belt. Marcus opened the door with a friendly smile. Good morning, gentlemen. How can I help you? The taller man stepped forward, puffing out his chest importantly. Good morning, sir. I'm Dale Hoffman, and this is my partner, Rick Steinberg. We're with Pinewood Estates Community Compliance Services. He gestured to the patch on his shirt, which Marcus now saw read PEX in bold letters. Community Compliance Services, Marcus repeated, keeping his tone neutral despite the warning bells going off in his head. In his military experience, people who gave themselves official-sounding titles were often trying to compensate for a lack of actual authority. That's right, Rick jumped in, consulting his clipboard with exaggerated importance. We've received several complaints about violations of neighborhood standards at this address, and we're here to conduct an official inspection. Marcus felt his eyebrows rise slightly. Complaints? What kind of complaints? Dale cleared his throat and began reading from his clipboard in a pompous tone. Excessive noise levels, improper lawn maintenance, unauthorized gatherings, and general disruption of neighborhood harmony. I'm sorry, but I think there's been some kind of mistake, Marcus replied calmly. We maintain our property according to all HOA guidelines, and we certainly don't engage in any disruptive activities. Sir, we have documented evidence, Rick insisted, pulling out a small digital camera and showing Marcus the screen. The photo showed Marcus's truck parked in their driveway. This oversized commercial vehicle violates Section 12 of the vehicle restrictions. Marcus looked at the image of his perfectly ordinary pickup truck and back at the two men. That's a standard half-ton pickup. It's not commercial. and it's well within the size restrictions outlined in the HOA covenant. It's bigger than what we consider appropriate for this neighborhood, Dale said dismissively, and frankly, it's bringing down property values. Some of the other residents have expressed concerns about the type of people moving into Pinewood Estates. The phrase type of people hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus felt his military training kick in, the same mental discipline that had kept him calm under enemy fire. His voice remained steady, but his dark eyes hardened slightly. And what type of people would that be exactly? Rick shifted uncomfortably, apparently realizing his partner had said too much. Well, you know, people who don't really fit the neighborhood aesthetic. This is a family community with certain standards. Daddy, who's at the door? Maya's voice called from the kitchen, followed by the sound of little feet running across the hardwood floor. Just some visitors, sweetheart. Go finish your breakfast, Marcus called back, never taking his eyes off the two men. Dale's face twisted into what might have been intended as a smile, but looked more like a sneer. Look, mister, he consulted his clipboard. Washington, we're trying to be reasonable here. If you work with us, we can probably overlook some of these violations, but we need to see some effort to improve the situation. What exactly are you suggesting? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to understand exactly what kind of game these two were playing. Well, for starters, that truck needs to go, Rick said, warming up to his role. And we've noticed your wife hanging laundry outside sometimes. That's not the image we want to project in this neighborhood. People have washers and dryers for a reason. Also, Dale added, consulting his clipboard again, there's been complaints about your children being too loud when they play outside. Other residents are finding it disruptive to the peaceful atmosphere they moved here to enjoy. Marcus felt a cold anger building in his chest, the same focused rage that had made him legendary among his Delta Force teammates. But where other men might have exploded, Marcus became quieter, more controlled. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Are you telling me that my children can't play in their own backyard? We're suggesting they need to be more considerate of others, Dale replied, apparently missing the dangerous undertone in Marcus's voice. And maybe you folks might be happier in a neighborhood that's more suited to your lifestyle. Sarah appeared behind Marcus, having heard raised voices. She took in the scene quickly, noting the tension in her husband's shoulders and the smug expressions on the two men's faces. Is everything all right? She asked, slipping her hand into Marcus's. These gentlemen claim to be from some kind of community compliance service, Marcus explained, his voice carefully controlled. They seem to think our family doesn't meet neighborhood standards. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger, but like her husband, she kept her composure. I'm sorry, but who exactly do you represent? I've never heard of this compliance service, and I know all the HOA board members. Rick straightened up importantly. We're independent contractors hired by concerned residents to ensure neighborhood quality standards are maintained. Independent contractors? Sarah repeated. So you're not actually affiliated with the Homeowners Association? We work closely with community leaders, Dale said vaguely. The point is, we have authority to enforce compliance, and we're prepared to take action if necessary. Marcus felt something click into place in his mind. These weren't official inspectors or even legitimate HOA representatives. They were vigilantes, self-appointed enforcers who had apparently decided the Washington family didn't belong in their neighborhood. What kind of action? He asked quietly. Fines, liens, legal proceedings. Rick rattled off, clearly enjoying his perceived power. We have lawyers who specialize in property disputes. It can get very expensive very quickly. And very unpleasant, Dale added with a meaningful look. Sometimes it's better for everyone if families just accept that they might be happier somewhere else. The threat was clear, even if it was couched in bureaucratic language. Marcus had encountered bullies before, from schoolyard thugs to enemy combatants, and he recognized the type. They relied on intimidation and assumed their targets would back down rather than fight back. I see, Marcus said, his voice carrying a note that made both men shift uncomfortably without understanding why. And if we refuse to comply with your suggestions, then we'll be forced to escalate the matter, Dale replied, though he suddenly seemed less confident than he had moments before. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized his prey had walked into a trap of their own making. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate you taking the time to visit us this morning. I'll certainly give your concerns the consideration they deserve. Something in his tone made both men step back slightly, Rick fumbled with his clipboard while Dale cleared his throat nervously. Right, well, we'll be in touch, Dale said, already backing toward their car. We expect to see some changes around here. Oh, I think you can count on seeing some changes, Marcus replied, watching them retreat. Have a pleasant day, gentlemen. As the white sedan pulled away from the curb, Sarah squeezed Marcus's hand. What are we going to do? Marcus watched the car disappear around the corner, his mind already working through options and strategies. These men had made a critical error in judgment. They had assumed he was just another suburban father who would be intimidated by their official-sounding threats and thinly veiled racism. They had no idea what they had just walked into. That afternoon, while the girls were at soccer practice, Marcus sat in his home office researching Pinewood Estates community compliance services. What he found confirmed his suspicions. The organization didn't exist as any official entity. No business license, no registration with the state, no legitimate authority to enforce anything. Dale Hoffman and Rick Steinberg were operating as freelance intimidators, targeting families they deemed undesirable. Sarah knocked on the office door and entered with 2 cups of coffee. Find anything interesting? These guys are frauds, Marcus said, turning his laptop screen toward her. They're not affiliated with the HOA, the city, or any legitimate authority. They're basically running a protection racket. Protection racket? They threaten families with fake legal action and made-up fines, hoping people will either pay them off or move away rather than fight back. It's illegal as hell. Sarah sank into the chair across from his desk. Should we call the police? Marcus considered this. We could, but right now all we have is their word against ours about what was said. They were careful not to make any explicit threats that could be easily proven. We need more evidence, so what do we do? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind working through possibilities. We let them make the next move. They'll be back, probably with escalated tactics. When they do, we'll be ready. Ready how? Marcus opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small device about the size of a matchbox. Security cameras, audio recording, documentation of everything they do. If they want to play games, we'll play by rules they don't understand. That evening, Marcus discreetly installed several small security cameras around the exterior of their home. To any casual observer, they looked like standard home security equipment. In reality, they were military-grade surveillance devices capable of recording high-definition video and audio from distances that would surprise most people. Monday morning brought the first test of his preparations. Marcus was working in his home office when his phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. A white sedan had pulled up in front of their house, and Dale Hoffman was walking toward the front door with a thick manila envelope in his hand. Marcus quickly activated the recording system and walked to the front door, opening it before Dale could ring the bell. Mr. Hoffman, back so soon? Dale seemed surprised to be met at the door so quickly. Mr. Washington, I have some documents that require your immediate attention. Documents? Formal notice of violations and required remediation, Dale said, thrusting the envelope toward Marcus with exaggerated authority. You have 72 hours to comply or face legal action. Marcus accepted the envelope but didn't open it. Legal action from whom exactly? The Pinewood Estates Community Standards Board, Dale replied smoothly. We represent concerned property owners who are committed to maintaining neighborhood quality. And this standards board, they have legal authority to issue binding orders? Absolutely. We work with qualified attorneys who specialize in property law and community enforcement. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I see, and if I have questions about these documents, who should I contact? Dale pulled out a business card with the PEX logo. You can reach me at this number, but I wouldn't wait too long. These matters tend to escalate quickly if not addressed promptly. Oh, I'll definitely be addressing this promptly, Marcus assured him. You can count on that. After Dale left, Marcus opened the envelope and laughed out loud. The documents were laughably amateur, full of legal-sounding nonsense that wouldn't fool anyone with actual legal knowledge. Phrases like community aesthetic violations and demographic compatibility standards were scattered throughout, along with demands for immediate compliance with restrictions that existed nowhere in the actual HOA covenant. The most telling part was a schedule of remediation fees that ranged from $500 to $5,000 for various violations. It was clearly a shakedown operation, designed to extract money from families who were either too intimidated or too unfamiliar with the law to fight back. Marcus photographed every page and then made some phone calls. His first call was to James Patterson, a former military colleague who now worked as a private investigator in Cleveland. His second was to Maria Santos, a civil rights attorney he had met at a veterans charity event. His third was to Mike Chen, a neighbor who served on the actual HOA board. The conversation with Mike was particularly enlightening. "I've never heard of these guys," Mike said when Marcus described the visits. "The HOA board didn't hire any compliance service, and we certainly didn't authorize anyone to issue fines or violations. What you're describing sounds like fraud." "That's what I figured. Have any other families been targeted?" "Not that I know of, but I can ask around discreetly. If this is happening to other people, we need to know about it. I'd appreciate that. And Mike, if anyone asks, we never had this conversation. I want to see how far these guys are willing to push this." By Wednesday, Marcus had a complete picture of Dale Hoffman and Rick Steinberg's operation. James Patterson's investigation revealed that they had targeted 6 other families in the neighborhood over the past 8 months. All were minorities or interracial couples. 3 families had paid the demanded fees and 2 had moved away. Only one family, the Garcias, had refused to comply, and they were now facing escalating harassment. Maria Santos reviewed the fake legal documents and confirmed they were worthless. "This is criminal fraud, intimidation, and potentially extortion," she told Marcus over the phone. "We have enough evidence to press charges right now." "Not yet," Marcus replied. "I want to catch them in the act of making explicit threats. And I want to know who's really behind this. These 2 don't seem smart enough to have organized this on their own." His answer came Thursday afternoon. Marcus was in his garage working on his truck when he heard the distinctive rumble of multiple vehicles approaching. Through the window, he saw 3 cars pull up in front of his house. Dale and Rick emerged from the lead vehicle, accompanied by 4 other men he didn't recognize. Marcus activated his phone to start recording and walked out to meet them. The 6 men had arranged themselves in what was clearly meant to be an intimidating formation on his front lawn. "Mr. Washington," Dale called out loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, "we're here to conduct a final inspection and collect outstanding compliance fees." "Outstanding fees?" Marcus asked calmly, walking closer to the group. "I wasn't aware I owed any fees." Rick pulled out a calculator and clipboard with theatrical efficiency. "Violation of vehicle restrictions, $500. Failure to maintain aesthetic standards, $1,000. Disruptive children, $750. Plus administrative fees and processing costs, your total comes to $3,400. And if I decline to pay these fees?" One of the new men, a heavily built guy with tattoos covering his forearms, stepped forward. "Then we'll have to take alternative measures to ensure compliance." Alternative measures? Sometimes property gets damaged when homeowners don't take care of maintenance issues, the tattooed man said with a meaningful smile. "Windows break, lawns get torn up, cars get scratched. It's unfortunate, but these things happen in neighborhoods where people don't cooperate." Marcus felt the familiar calm that came over him in dangerous situations. These men were making explicit threats now, and everything was being recorded. But more importantly, they had just crossed a line from fraud to intimidation with implied violence. "I see," Marcus said quietly. "And you gentlemen feel comfortable making these threats in broad daylight?" "What threats?" Dale laughed. "We're just explaining the reality of property maintenance in a neighborhood like this. Things can get expensive if you don't take care of problems early." Marcus nodded slowly, as if considering their words. The 6 men were spread out across his lawn, clearly confident in their numerical advantage. They had obviously used this tactic before and found it effective. What they didn't know was that Marcus Washington had spent 20 years training for situations exactly like this. 6 against 1 were odds he had faced in Afghanistan and lived to tell about it. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and he wasn't going to handle this the way he would have handled enemy combatants. This was his neighborhood, his family's home, and these men had just made the mistake of threatening people he loved. "Well, gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of finality, "I think it's time we had a more serious conversation about compliance." Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call while the 6 men watched with growing confusion. "Detective Rodriguez? This is Marcus Washington. I need to report a fraud and intimidation scheme in progress at my address. Yes, I have everything recorded. They're here right now making threats." Dale's face went pale. "Now wait just a minute. Detective, they're demanding payment of fake fees and threatening property damage if I don't comply. Marcus continued calmly. 6 men total, license plates. He rattled off the numbers of all 3 vehicles with military precision. I'll keep them here until you arrive. Rick started backing toward his car. We don't have to listen to this. Let's go. Actually, you do, Marcus said, pocketing his phone. His voice had changed, carrying an authority that made all 6 men freeze where they stood. You see, gentlemen, you made a critical error in judgment when you decided to target my family. The tattooed man who had made the property damage threats stepped forward aggressively. Listen, pal, you don't want to mess with us. We've got connections. Connections? Marcus interrupted, and something in his laugh made the man stop talking. Let me tell you about connections. Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, tossing it to Dale. Call that number. Ask for Colonel Harrison. Tell him Marcus Washington wants to discuss community compliance. Dale looked at the card with confusion. What is this? That's the direct line to the commanding officer of the Ohio National Guard, Marcus said casually. Colonel Harrison and I served together in Afghanistan. Lovely man. Very interested in hearing about civilians impersonating authority figures to extort military families. The 6 men exchanged nervous glances. Rick fumbled with his clipboard, suddenly looking less confident. Or, Marcus continued, pulling out another card, you could call this number and ask for Special Agent Williams at the FBI field office in Cleveland. Tell her Marcus Washington has information about a RICO predicate involving interstate fraud. I'm sure she'd love to hear about your little operation. RICO? Dale stammered. We're not organized crime. Conspiracy to commit fraud across multiple addresses using intimidation tactics and threats of violence to extort money from victims? That's textbook racketeering, gentlemen. And since you've apparently been doing this in multiple neighborhoods, it crosses jurisdictional lines. The FBI takes that very seriously. Marcus began walking slowly toward the group, and despite their numerical advantage, all 6 men instinctively stepped back. There was something in his movements, the controlled grace of a predator that triggered ancient survival instincts. But here's what really interests me. Marcus continued conversationally. You targeted 6 families in this neighborhood, all minorities or interracial couples. That suggests this isn't just about money. It's about driving certain people out of the neighborhood. The Justice Department has a whole division dedicated to prosecuting civil rights violations. They're very thorough. The tattooed man was sweating now despite the cool afternoon air. Look, man, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Oh, we definitely got off on the wrong foot, Marcus agreed. You see, when you threatened my family, you made this personal, and I take threats against my family very seriously. Marcus stopped about 10 feet away from the group, close enough that they could see the complete absence of fear in his dark eyes. Would you like to know what I used to do for a living? You said you were in security, Rick said weakly. Security consultant, yes. But before that, I spent 20 years in the United States Army, mostly in special operations. You know what special operations soldiers do, don't you? The 6 men said nothing, but Marcus could see understanding beginning to dawn on their faces. We eliminate threats, Marcus said simply. We study our enemies, learn their weaknesses, and then we neutralize them using whatever means necessary. It's what we're trained for. It's what we're very, very good at. Dale was backing toward his car now, but Marcus wasn't finished. For instance, Rick Steinberg, apartment 4B at the Willowbrook complex on Elm Street. You're 3 months behind on rent and your landlord is already starting eviction proceedings. Your ex-wife is demanding back child support for your 2 kids in Tennessee. Your credit score is 412. Rick's face went white. How did you... Dale Hoffman, currently unemployed and living with your mother at 847 Pine Ridge Road. You filed for bankruptcy last year after your construction business failed. You owe $17,000 in back taxes to the IRS. Your unemployment benefits run out next month. That's impossible, Dale whispered. Marcus smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Gentlemen, I know more about you than you know about yourselves. I know where you live, where you shop, what you drive, who you owe money to, and what you're afraid of. I know about the real estate company that's been paying you to harass families into moving. I know about the insurance fraud Rick committed in Tennessee, and I know about the assault charges Dale faced in Michigan before he moved here. The 6 men were backing away steadily now. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated. But here's what you don't know about me, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You don't know about the missions I've completed, the problems I've solved, or the very creative ways I've dealt with threats to American citizens. You don't know about my security clearance, my government connections, or the resources I have access to. Marcus pulled out his phone again and showed them the screen, which displayed a detailed dossier on each of them, complete with photographs, addresses, and criminal histories. What you also don't know is that every word of this conversation has been recorded and transmitted to multiple secure servers. Right now, copies of this footage are in the hands of local police, the FBI, the IRS, and several other agencies that I think would find your activities very interesting. We never did anything illegal, the tattooed man said desperately. We were just trying to maintain neighborhood standards. Fraud, extortion, intimidation, criminal impersonation, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations. Marcus listed calmly. That's 5 felonies right there, and we're just getting started. The real estate company that hired you has been doing this in 3 different states. This is going to be a very big case. The sound of sirens in the distance made all 6 men look around nervously. Marcus checked his watch. Right on time. Detective Rodriguez is very punctual. Look, we can work this out, Dale said frantically. Maybe we were too aggressive in our approach. Too aggressive? Marcus laughed. You threatened my children. You tried to extort money from my family. You implied that our house might be vandalized if we didn't pay your fake fees. Do you have any idea what you've done? 3 police cars turned onto Maple Street, followed by an unmarked sedan that Marcus recognized as belonging to the FBI. The thing about being a Delta Force commander, Marcus said as the vehicles approached, is that you learn to see the bigger picture. This isn't just about you 6 idiots trying to shake down some families. This is about a systematic campaign to drive minorities out of suburban neighborhoods. This is about civil rights, housing discrimination, and organized fraud. The lead police car pulled into Marcus's driveway, and Detective Rodriguez stepped out. She was a tall Latina woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Colonel Washington, she said with a respectful nod. These the individuals you called about? That's correct, Detective. They've just finished making explicit threats about property damage if I don't pay their fraudulent fees. Everything's been recorded. Detective Rodriguez looked at the 6 men with professional interest. Gentlemen, I need to see some identification. Now. As the police began processing the scene, Marcus noticed several neighbors coming out to watch. Mrs. Chen from down the street, the Garcias from 2 houses over, and several other families he recognized from the neighborhood. Maria Santos pulled up in her BMW and stepped out with a briefcase. She was a small woman with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades fighting injustice in courtrooms. Colonel Washington, she said, shaking his hand. I see our friends decided to escalate things. They made it easy, Marcus replied. Explicit threats, criminal impersonation, attempted extortion. We've got them on multiple felonies. And the civil rights case. 6 families targeted, all minorities or interracial couples. Clear pattern of housing discrimination. The Justice Department is going to love this. As the 6 men were being read their rights and loaded into police cars, Dale Hoffman looked back at Marcus with a mixture of fear and confusion. You played us, he said accusingly. Marcus nodded. From the moment you walked onto my property. You see, Mr. Hoffman, you made the mistake of thinking I was just another suburban father who would be intimidated by your little show. You forgot that some people fight back, and some people have the skills and resources to fight back very effectively. This isn't over, the tattooed man called out, as he was put into the back of a police car. Marcus walked over to the car and leaned down to the open window. You're absolutely right. This is just the beginning. See, you threatened my family, and I take that very personally. I'm going to make sure everyone involved in this scheme faces the full consequences of their actions. The real estate company that hired you, the lawyers who provided your fake legal documents, everyone who knew what you were doing and did nothing to stop it. The man's face went pale as the implications sank in. Marcus straightened up and watched as the police cars pulled away from his house, carrying the 6 would-be intimidators toward what would undoubtedly be a very long legal process. Detective Rodriguez approached him with a satisfied expression. Colonel, I have to say this is the most well-documented case I've seen in years. The recordings, the evidence you collected, the background research, it's like you handed us a complete prosecution package. I had good teachers, Marcus replied. When you're trained to neutralize threats, you learn to be thorough. The FBI is going to want to interview you about the broader conspiracy. Agent Williams said this ties into investigations they've been conducting in 3 other states. Marcus nodded. I figured it was bigger than just these 6. Operations like this don't happen in isolation. As the crowd of neighbors began to disperse, Mrs. Garcia approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. Colonel Washington, I can't thank you enough. Those men have been terrorizing our family for months. We were afraid to leave our house some days. You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Garcia. Nobody should have to live in fear in their own neighborhood. If there's anything we can do to help with the legal case, just be ready to testify about what they put you through. Your testimony will help ensure they face appropriate consequences. Mike Chen joined them, shaking his head in amazement. Marcus, I had no idea this was happening. The HOA board needs to issue a formal statement making it clear that these people had no authority whatsoever. That would be helpful, Marcus agreed. The more official documentation we have, the stronger the case becomes. As the evening settled over Maple Street, Marcus found himself standing in his driveway with Sarah and the girls, who had returned from soccer practice to find their quiet neighborhood buzzing with police activity. Daddy, why were there police cars at our house? Maya asked, looking worried. Marcus knelt down to her level, choosing his words carefully. Some men were doing bad things to families in our neighborhood, sweetheart. The police came to stop them and make sure everyone stays safe. Are the bad men gone now? Mia asked. Yes, baby. They're gone and they won't be bothering anyone anymore. Sarah put her hand on Marcus's shoulder. How long have you been planning this? Since the first day they showed up. I knew they'd escalate their tactics if we didn't respond to their initial intimidation. People like that always push until they meet resistance. And if they hadn't escalated, Marcus smiled, then I would have found another way to expose them. There's always another way. That night, after the girls were asleep, Marcus and Sarah sat on their back porch looking out at the quiet neighborhood. The autumn air was crisp and the first leaves were beginning to change color on the old oak tree in their backyard. So what happens now? Sarah asked. Now the justice system takes over. Dale Rick and their friends will face federal charges for conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and civil rights violations. The real estate company that hired them will face even more serious charges, and every family they targeted will have grounds for civil lawsuits. Will we have to testify? Probably. But with the evidence we collected, it should be pretty straightforward. The defense won't have much to work with. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing everything that had happened. I'm proud of you, you know. You could have handled this very differently. How do you mean? You could have just scared them off or dealt with it privately. Instead, you made sure they faced real consequences for what they did to other families. Marcus took her hand, squeezing it gently. 20 years in the Army taught me that some fights are worth having, even when they're not easy. This was about more than just our family. It was about making sure other families don't have to go through what the Garcias went through. The girls are going to have questions when they get older, and we'll answer them honestly. We'll tell them that sometimes bad people try to hurt good families, and when that happens, good people have to stand up and fight back. Marcus looked out at the peaceful neighborhood, thinking about the events of the day. 6 men had come to his house thinking they could intimidate a suburban father into compliance with their illegal scheme. They had no idea they were threatening a man who had spent 2 decades defending American citizens from much more dangerous enemies. But more than that, they had failed to understand what they were really up against. They thought they were targeting an isolated family who would be too afraid or too powerless to fight back. Instead, they had encountered a military officer with the skills, resources, and determination to not only protect his own family, but to ensure that their entire criminal operation was dismantled. Do you think they'll try something like this again? Sarah asked. Marcus shook his head. Not these guys. And word will get around. Other families, other neighborhoods, they'll know that there are consequences for targeting people like this. Good, Sarah said firmly. Maybe some other family won't have to go through what we did. As they sat together in the peaceful evening, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. From the mountains of Afghanistan to the suburbs of Ohio, from hunting terrorists to exposing fraudsters, the skills remained remarkably similar. Identify the threat, gather intelligence, plan the operation, execute with precision. The only difference was that now, instead of protecting American interests overseas, he was protecting American families in his own neighborhood. And in many ways, that felt even more important. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in the federal courthouse in Cleveland, watching as the prosecution laid out their case against Premier Properties Development and its network of intimidation contractors. The courtroom was packed with reporters, civil rights activists, and families from 6 different neighborhoods who had been targeted by the scheme. Dale Hoffman and Rick Steinberg sat at the defendant's table looking considerably less confident than they had on Marcus's front lawn. The 4 other men who had accompanied them that day had already pled guilty in exchange for cooperation with the prosecution. Their testimony had revealed the scope of the operation, which extended far beyond Pinewood Estates. Your Honor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh addressed the court. The evidence will show that the defendants operated a systematic campaign to drive minority families from suburban neighborhoods through fraud, intimidation, and threats of violence. This wasn't just about money. It was about maintaining what they called neighborhood demographics. Marcus glanced at Sarah, who was sitting beside him in the gallery. The girls were at school, blissfully unaware of the legal proceedings that had resulted from that confrontation in their front yard. They had adapted quickly to the increased security measures Marcus had quietly implemented around their home, accepting his explanation that they were just being extra careful. The prosecution's case was devastating in its thoroughness. Phone records showed regular communication between Dale and Rick and executives at Premier Properties. Bank records revealed payments totaling over $200,000 for community compliance services. Most damning of all were the recordings Marcus had made, which clearly showed the defendants making explicit threats and demanding payment for fabricated violations. When it was the defense's turn, their attorney, a nervous-looking man who seemed overwhelmed by the scope of the case, attempted to argue that his clients were merely overzealous in their interpretation of homeowner association rules. Your Honor, my clients believed they were acting within their authority to maintain community standards. There was never any intent to defraud or intimidate. Objection, Attorney Walsh interrupted. The defendants had no authority whatsoever to collect fees or issue violations. They were private citizens making up rules as they went along. Sustained, Judge Morrison replied. The jury will disregard the defense's characterization of the defendant's authority. Marcus watched the proceedings with professional interest. He had testified the previous day, walking the jury through the timeline of events and explaining how he had gathered evidence of the defendant's activities. The prosecutor had been careful to establish his military background and expertise in intelligence gathering, lending credibility to his methodical approach to documenting the crime. During cross-examination, Dale's attorney had tried to suggest that Marcus had somehow entrapped his clients by encouraging them to make threats. The strategy backfired spectacularly when Marcus calmly explained that he had simply allowed the defendants to reveal their true intentions on camera. I never asked them to threaten my family, Marcus had testified. I never asked them to demand money for fake violations. I simply documented what they chose to do and say. The most powerful testimony had come from the families who had been victimized by the scheme. Mrs. Garcia had broken down on the witness stand while describing how Dale and Rick had followed her children to school and taken photographs of them. An elderly Korean War veteran named Robert Kim had testified about being told that people like him didn't belong in his neighborhood of 30 years. Most shocking of all was the testimony of Jennifer Torres, a single mother who had actually paid the extorted fees rather than risk losing her home. She had borrowed money from family members to pay Dale and Rick's demanded compliance costs, money she couldn't afford and would never get back. Now, as closing arguments concluded, Marcus felt confident that justice would be served. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury seemed engaged and sympathetic to the victims. During the lunch recess, Marcus was approached by a tall black man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as David Williams, a civil rights attorney from Washington, D.C. Colonel Washington, I wanted to thank you for how you handled this case. Your documentation and evidence gathering probably saved the prosecution months of investigation. I'm glad I could help, Marcus replied. How many other neighborhoods do you think were affected? Based on what we've uncovered so far, at least 12 different communities across 3 states. Premier Properties had quite an operation going. They would identify neighborhoods that were becoming more diverse, then hire people like Dale and Rick to harass minority families until they moved away. And it worked? Unfortunately, yes. In most cases, families either paid the fake fees or moved rather than fight back. You and your family were the first to document everything and fight back systematically. Sarah joined them, carrying coffee for herself and Marcus. Mr. Williams was just telling me about the civil lawsuit the families are filing against Premier Properties. The criminal case is just the beginning, Williams explained. We're seeking damages for every family that was targeted, plus punitive damages to make sure companies think twice before trying something like this again. What kind of damages are we talking about? Marcus asked. Conservative estimate, $8 to $10 million. These families suffered real harm, lost equity in their homes, moving expenses, emotional distress. Some families were forced to sell their houses at below-market prices because of the harassment. A court clerk approached them. Excuse me, the jury is returning with a verdict. Back in the courtroom, Marcus watched as the jury foreman stood to announce their decision. The courtroom was completely silent, everyone holding their breath. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant, Dale Hoffman, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant, Rick Steinberg, guilty. The foreman continued reading through the list of charges: extortion, civil rights violations, racketeering, finding both men guilty on every count. By the time he finished, Dale was slumped in his chair and Rick was visibly shaking. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but Marcus knew that both men were facing significant prison time. Federal sentencing guidelines for their crimes carried minimum sentences of 5 to 7 years, and with their extensive criminal history, they would likely receive even more. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus was approached by Special Agent Williams from the FBI. Colonel, I wanted to let you know that the Premier Properties investigation is expanding. We've identified similar operations in 7 other states, all using the same playbook. Your documentation helped us understand how the whole scheme worked. Good, Marcus said simply. How many people were involved? At the corporate level, about 20 executives and managers. Street level, we're looking at maybe 60 people like Dale and Rick who were doing the actual intimidation. It's going to take months to prosecute everyone. But you'll get them all? Agent Williams smiled. Oh yes, Colonel. We'll get them all. This case has become a priority at the highest levels. Nobody in the Justice Department wants to see American families terrorized in their own neighborhoods. That evening, Marcus and Sarah sat in their living room while the girls did homework at the kitchen table. The local news was covering the verdict, and Marcus was surprised to see footage of himself leaving the courthouse. Federal prosecutors say this case represents one of the largest housing discrimination schemes prosecuted in recent years, the reporter was saying. The investigation was triggered when retired Army Colonel Marcus Washington documented attempts to extort money from his family using fake homeowner association violations. Maya looked up from her math homework. Daddy, are you famous now? Marcus laughed. No, sweetheart. I just helped catch some bad guys who were being mean to families. Like a superhero? More like a detective. Sometimes when people do bad things, other people have to gather evidence to prove it. Mia joined her sister at the kitchen table divider. Mrs. Peterson at school said you were a soldier before you caught the bad guys. That's right. I was a soldier for 20 years before we moved here. Did you catch bad guys when you were a soldier too? Marcus exchanged a glance with Sarah. Sometimes, but my job was mostly to protect people and keep them safe. Like you protected us from the mean men? Exactly like that. As the girls returned to their homework, Sarah moved closer to Marcus on the couch. Any regrets about how this all played out? Marcus considered the question seriously. None at all. Those men needed to face consequences for what they did. If we hadn't stopped them, they would have kept targeting families, and eventually someone might have gotten hurt. The news said they might go to prison for 10 years. They made their choices when they decided to threaten families and extort money. Everything that happens to them now is a result of those choices. Marcus looked around their comfortable living room, at his daughters doing homework and his wife reading beside him, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what he had spent 20 years defending, the right of American families to live peacefully in their own homes without fear of intimidation or harassment. 1 year later, Marcus stood in front of the newly installed community center in Pinewood Estates, watching as families from across the neighborhood gathered for the annual diversity celebration. The building had been funded by the settlement money from the Premier Properties lawsuit, and it served as a symbol of how the community had transformed in the wake of the discrimination case. Maya and Mia ran past him chasing after the Garcia children, their laughter mixing with the sounds of music and conversation from the festival. Sarah was at a booth representing the neighborhood watch committee she had helped establish, talking with other parents about community safety initiatives. "Colonel Washington," called out a familiar voice. Marcus turned to see Detective Rodriguez approaching with a young Latina woman he didn't recognize. "Detective, good to see you. How's the family?" "Everyone's doing great, thanks. I wanted you to meet someone. This is my niece, Carmen Rodriguez. She's a journalism student at Ohio State, and she's writing her senior thesis about the Premier Properties case." Carmen stepped forward with a notebook in her hand. "Colonel Washington, I've been following the aftermath of the case for my research. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" "Of course. What kind of questions?" "Well, I'm interested in how the prosecution affected other communities. My research shows that similar schemes in 6 other states were shut down after the precedent your case established." Marcus nodded. "Agent Williams mentioned that the investigation had expanded. What did you find?" Carmen consulted her notes. In total, the FBI identified 43 separate discrimination schemes operating across the country. Most of them shut down voluntarily once news of the conviction spread. Companies didn't want to risk federal prosecution. And the families who were targeted? That's the really interesting part. Your case established a legal framework that other families could use to fight back. In Maryland, a group of families used your documentation methods to expose a similar scheme. In Texas, a military veteran used your case as a template to shut down fake HOA enforcement in his neighborhood. Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction hearing this. "So other people learned from what we did here?" "More than that. Your case has become required reading in civil rights law courses. Law students study your evidence-gathering techniques and the prosecution strategy." Sarah joined them, having heard the conversation from her booth. "I think what made the difference was that Marcus refused to be intimidated. Most people would have either paid the fake fees or just moved away. But why didn't you take one of those options?" Carmen asked. "Wasn't it risky to confront them directly?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "I spent 20 years defending American principles overseas. When I came home, I wasn't about to let thugs drive my family out of our neighborhood because of the color of our skin. Some things are worth fighting for. Your military background clearly helped with the investigation. Did your Delta Force training influence how you approach the situation?" "The training taught me to assess threats systematically and document everything. But more than that, it taught me that you can't let bullies control the situation. You have to take the initiative and stay one step ahead of them." Carmen scribbled notes rapidly. "What would you say to other families who might face similar harassment?" "Document everything. Know your rights. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And understand that these predators count on people being too scared or isolated to fight back. When you stand up to them, you're not just protecting your own family. You're protecting everyone who might be targeted after you." Mike Chen approached their group, carrying a plate of food from one of the vendor booths. "Marcus, did you see the article about Dale and Rick in today's paper?" "No, what about them?" "They're both getting out of federal prison next month. Dale's been in for 8 years, Rick for 7. The article says they're both required to perform community service working with civil rights organizations." Sarah raised an eyebrows. "Think they learned their lesson?" "Hard to say," Marcus replied. "But they're both convicted felons now. If they try anything like this again, they'll face much harsher sentences as repeat offenders." Carmen looked up from her notes. "My research showed that Premier Properties was completely shut down. The executives got sentences ranging from 12 to 20 years. The civil lawsuit payments bankrupted the company." "Good," Mike said firmly. "Companies like that need to understand there are real consequences for targeting families." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself reflecting on how much had changed in their neighborhood. The diversity celebration had become an annual tradition, bringing together families from a dozen different cultural backgrounds. The community center hosted ESL classes, job training programs, and cultural events throughout the year. More importantly, the neighborhood had developed a strong support network. When new families moved in, established residents made sure they felt welcome and informed them about their rights. The real HOA board had implemented clear procedures for addressing complaints and had zero tolerance for harassment or discrimination. Mrs. Garcia approached Marcus with her husband and their teenage son, who Marcus recognized from the high school soccer team. "Colonel Washington, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did for our family. Miguel just got accepted to Ohio State with a full scholarship. That's wonderful news. Mrs. Garcia, you should be very proud. We never would have stayed in the neighborhood if you hadn't stopped those men. Miguel wouldn't have had the same opportunities if we had been forced to move." Her husband nodded gratefully. "Our family will never forget what you did. You gave us back our sense of safety in our own home." As the sun began to set, the festival wound down and families started heading home. Marcus and Sarah packed up leftover food while the girls played on the community center playground with their friends. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Sarah asked as they watched their daughters. "What's that?" "Maya and Mia grew up here seeing their community stand up for what's right. They learned that when people try to hurt others, good people fight back. That's going to stay with them their whole lives." Marcus smiled, watching his daughters laugh and play with children from families of different backgrounds and cultures. This was the America he had fought to defend. Diverse, welcoming, and strong enough to confront its problems and emerge better for the experience. Detective Rodriguez's niece approached them one more time. "Colonel Washington, I have one last question for my thesis. Do you ever regret not handling the situation more quietly? Some people might say you could have scared those men off without involving law enforcement." Marcus paused to consider the question seriously. "Carmen, if I had just scared them away, they would have moved on to target other families who might not have had the resources to fight back. By involving law enforcement and making sure they faced serious consequences, we stopped them from hurting anyone else. But it must have been stressful for your family, going through the trial and all the publicity." "It was," Sarah admitted. "But we wanted our daughters to see that you don't just protect your own family, you protect your community. Sometimes that means taking on challenges that are bigger than yourself. And the result speaks for itself," Marcus added, gesturing toward the diverse group of families packing up from the festival. "Look at this neighborhood now. Look at how strong and unified the community has become. That doesn't happen when people just keep their heads down and hope problems go away." Carmen closed her notebook. "Thank you both. This has been incredibly helpful for my research." As she walked away, Marcus turned to Sarah. "You know what's funny? Dale and Rick thought they were protecting their neighborhood from change. But all they really did was accelerate it. The legal case brought so much positive attention to Pinewood Estates that property values actually went up. The community became stronger and more diverse than it ever would have been otherwise. Ironic, isn't it? Their attempts to drive out minority families ended up making this one of the most inclusive neighborhoods in the city." That night, after the girls were asleep, Marcus and Sarah sat on their back porch looking out at the quiet street. The old oak tree in their backyard had grown taller over the past year, its branches now reaching over the property line to shade the Garcia's garden. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked, echoing a question she had posed many times over the past year. "None at all," Marcus replied without hesitation. "We did the right thing. Sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing, but that doesn't make it any less right. The girls keep asking when you're going to write a book about what happened." Marcus laughed.
"I think Carmen's thesis will probably tell the story better than I could."
"Besides, I'm not much of a writer. You could be. Your incident reports were always very detailed. Military documentation is a little different from storytelling." Sarah smiled. "Maybe. But you know what story I think is worth telling? The story of how a neighborhood came together after being attacked. How families from different backgrounds united to build something stronger than what they had before." Marcus looked around at the peaceful community they had fought to protect and preserve. Tomorrow, Maya and Mia would wake up and play in their backyard without fear. Their neighbors would go to work knowing their homes and families were safe. Children from a dozen different cultural backgrounds would learn and grow together in schools that celebrated diversity rather than merely tolerating it. It had been a long journey from that first confrontation on their front lawn to this quiet evening 1 year later. But Marcus knew that some journeys were worth taking, regardless of how difficult they might be. Some fights were worth having, even when victory came at a cost. As a former Delta Force commander, he had learned that the most important battles were often fought not against foreign enemies, but for the principles that made America worth defending in the first place. Freedom, equality, and the right of all families to live peacefully in their chosen communities. Those were principles worth fighting for, whether the battlefield was the mountains of Afghanistan or the front lawn of a house on Maple Street in suburban Ohio.